Hello there, Mr. Braidwood here, and it is the Poppington History and Politics podcast. And this week I am joined by Mr. Hall, our resident Irish history expert, Mr. Hughes, our Hacienda historical expert, and our first guest, also an esteemed member of the history department, Mrs. Hughes. Hello, Mrs. Hughes. Thank you for joining us. I've got a fact for you. On this day in 1856, it's a sensible fact this time as well, Queen Victoria introduced the Victoria Cross for the first time. Ooh. And backdated it to 1854, I think, so that the people during the Crimean War could get it. I've also got another fact, which I'm sure Mr. Hall will know everything about. On this day in 1910, Colin Middleton, the esteemed Irish artist, surrealist artist, was born in Belfast. Do you want to tell us anything about Colin?
Yeah, tell us about Colin. He was an artist. He was born in Belfast in 1910, and his work was well received by many of his critics and not liked by some people.
I actually had a message. I had a message from a friend this week who listened to the podcast who really liked Irish history. He's looking forward to talking to Adam about it. So,
may I say how heavily disappointed they're going to be.
Anyway, as ever, just a quick reminder, no effing and jeffing, but robust banter is absolutely fine.
I have a fun fact.
Go for it.
I looked up the etymology of effing and jeffing.
Oh.
Jeffing doesn't have one. There isn't one. It's not a thing.
What do you mean? So there's obviously the effing is quite
clear. Effing, yeah. But the jeffing isn't because I was curious as to what jeffing was. Because basically, I didn't know what jeffing was, and I didn't, given your weekly rule, I didn't want to accidentally jeff one week without knowing what jeffing was. And so I went away and looked up jeffing, and it's not a thing.
Well, great due diligence.
The original is effing and blinding. There's some debate over what blinding means from the old curse God blind me, which is where we get blimey, of course. But jeffing,
someone else has been on Wikipedia this week, then.
Yep. Oh, absolutely. It's not possible to jeff, basically.
No, but I might have to change it then.
No, I mean, we're not going to jeff, so we can follow the rule.
Oh, I'm sure you can manage it, Adam, if you try hard enough.
No, it's not a thing. You weren't listening, were you, Mrs. Hughes? It's not a thing. You can't jeff.
But what if we can, by the end of this podcast's run, this glorious run of this podcast, what if we sort of defined what jeffing means?
I think we've digressed into a very strange area here. And if you've ever seen, I've just got in my head now, 21, or maybe it's 22 Jump Street, when he pretends to be a chap called Jeff. But anyway, I move on. We have this week, as ever, historical top trumps, where we will be discussing memorials and monuments, which is as close as we can get to actually visiting a place, something we love doing as part of the history and politics department. We of course have our book recommendation, historical book recommendation, and our historical song of the week. Although it will be interesting to see if it is removed for copyright reasons, as it was last week.
Yeah, but apparently there's 90 seconds of me air drumming now, which is also entertaining. But no music.
Very entertaining, very entertaining. We apologise about the missing sound, but you can see what the song is. But it's what we've all been waiting for. We have our next contender for Student Mastermind, and I'll let them in. It will be as seamless as ever. So I'm just going to admit them now. We'll wait silently. For our contender to arrive.
Absolute history hero.
He is an absolute history hero. I wonder if he's still sporting his
has he got beard?
Beard.
Beard.
Don't you think he looks like he's going for a Karl Marx? Oh, yes.
Hey, the beard is there. Well done, Bob.
Hello, Bob Clark. How are we doing?
Oh, good, thank you. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Just a quick reminder, you are on the History and Politics podcast. We don't have a name for it yet, but we're coming up with one. Obviously, no effing and jeffing.
No, I don't think that should be expected of me, to be fair, but yeah.
No, that is very true, very true.
Yes.
Rightio, Bob. What we're going to do, as we always do, it's part of the tradition now, and this is absolutely high quality podcasting. We're going to just play that music.
Will it work this week?
Music. Will it work this week? We've got a 50-50 success rate at the moment. So here we go. Hopefully you can hear it. Building up the tension.
You paused it.
Excellent stuff. Very apt, actually, as well, the 1980s version. So, just a reminder of the rules. Our version of Mastermind, there's no time limits, but you have 10 specialist subject questions and 10 general knowledge history questions. And we're trying to find out who our Pocklington sixth form champion will be. So, without further ado, our next contestant, name?
Bob Clark.
Occupation?
Student.
Specialist subject?
Music of the 80s.
So 10 questions from our now fabled quizmaster, Mr Hall, on music from the 1980s.
So, question 1. Which iconic Simple Minds song plays during the opening and closing credits of The Breakfast Club?
Don't You Forget About Me.
Correct. Question 2. In 1981, Ozzy Osbourne infamously did what at a record label gathering in LA?
Bit the head off a bat.
It was bit the heads off doves. Are we giving that, Mr. Braidwood?
We are not, because it's a separate.
We are not.
Oh.
Question 3. What was the best-selling single of the decade in the UK?
Last Christmas by Wham.
No, it was Christmas, but it's Do They Know It's Christmas?
Oh.
Question 4. In which iconic music video do Queen parody Coronation Street?
I've got it in my head as well. I can picture it.
You need to say it out loud, though.
Yeah. No, it's not Radio Gaga. No, I don't know. Pass.
I'm really glad you're not going through listing all the Queen songs. It's not. That would take us a while. The answer is I Want to Break Free.
Of course, yeah.
Question 5. American rock band Toto sang about which continent in 1982?
Africa.
Correct. Question 6. In the Human League's 1981 chart topper, Don't You Want Me, where, according to the lyrics, did the main female character work?
In a cocktail bar.
Correct. Question 7. Which singer was killed by his father in 1984?
Ooh, that's a good one. No, I don't know. Sorry, I can't know.
It was Marvin Gaye. There's no apology needed, Bob. Don't worry. Question 8. What was launched in August 1981 that changed the face of popular music?
MTV.
Correct. Question 9. Which 1984 Bruce Springsteen hit featured Courtney Cox, later Monica in Friends, in the video?
Born in the USA.
No, it was Dancing in the Dark. Question 10. Who was Never Gonna Give You Up in 1987?
Rick Astley.
Correct. Vein of YouTube pranks everywhere.
Fantastic stuff there. So that was, you got 5 points,
Yeah,
5
decent.
incorrect and 1 pass. So that's, 4 incorrect and 1 pass. That is a fantastic start, particularly for a quite a broad category, that one as well.
Yeah.
Why 1980s music, Bob?
Misspent hours on, during the harvest time on tractors, not really much to do other than listen to the radio. And Radio 1 gets a bit boring after a while, so yeah.
His music. The Ozzy Osbourne one, he did bite head off the bat. Was that on stage? Was that one at a gig?
Yeah.
Allegedly.
He believed that it was allegedly, he believed that it was a rubber bat. So the story goes, and he just bit his head off. But he obviously had form of biting heads off of animals. So,
what the biggest animal was that he bit the head off?
Just to make it quite clear, we don't condone as a department any.
Yeah, we are anti-biting the heads off animals.
No, that's awful.
It's absolutely awful. Rightio. Bob, that's a great start. We now move on to our 10 general knowledge history questions. So without further ado, Mr. Hall, take it away.
Bob, question 1. The army of which English king was defeated by Robert the Bruce and his Scottish army at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314?
Oh, we've lost sound a bit there, Bob.
We need it in sign language or interpretive dance.
Oh, I like this ventriloquism act. It's good.
Oh, no.
Oh, the sound has gone again. So what we're going to do, Bob, if you leave.
Oh, Mr. Braden went then. Oh.
Do you want to leave, Bob, and then come back again?
Right, while he's gone, I've got a history fact for the day.
Brilliant.
I'll share it with you.
Yeah, please do.
Right, so this was one I knew nothing about, but it came up on Twitter this morning. I thought it was brilliant. The oldest known living former head of state in the world is a chap called Mustafa Ben Halim, who was a prime minister of Libya from 1954 to 57, and he's 100 years old today. I started reading a little bit about him. He's quite an interesting chap. He took over Libya after, well, obviously, in effect after the Second World War, and he's really responsible for the growth and development of Libya. He developed relations with the West as well as the Soviet Union. And because he developed relations with the Soviet Union, they backed Libya essentially being recognized at the United Nations. And he actually resigned in 1957 because he was unhappy with the lack of commitment from King Idris, I think, about increased democracy in Libya. And then he was on holiday in Switzerland when the Gaddafi coup took place in late 60s, 69, I think. And so he wasn't able to return, and then spent a long time in exile. He returned to Libya in 2011, I think. Spent lots of time in London and Saudi and the Lebanon. But he's the oldest living former head of state.
That is fascinating. I read something the other day that was for our Me Too generation. It's absolutely horrendous, actually. But according to the QI elves, there was a criminal in 17th century London who used to run around smacking unaccompanied women on the backsides, shouting "Spanko."
Really?
Absolutely happened, apparently, according to the QI elves. Anyway, we are back. Bob, do we have sound? We still don't have sound. We've
Bob,
still
chat.
Sound.
Put your answers in chat. Put your answers in chat.
I'll put my answers in chat.
Oh, we've got it.
The sound. Let's quickly go. Mr. Hall, do you want to start again with the question?
Yeah, Bob, you might have to lean forward and get close to the microphone. That might be the issue. Try again. No.
Okay, you can. Oh, we can hear you now again.
When he says, "I'm going to put them in chat," we can hear him. Any other words, we can't hear them.
Okay, let's try it. Go for it.
So, do you have an answer for question 1, Bob?
James the First is a wild guess.
No, it's incorrect. It's Edward II. Question 2. What proportion of the English population is estimated to have been killed by the Black Death in 1348 to 9? No, it was less than that, around 30%.
Okay.
Question 3. The Great Exhibition of 1851 was held in the newly built Crystal Palace to showcase new scientific and technological innovations. Which prince did much to inspire and champion this event?
Albert.
Correct. Question 4. In 1865, which amendment to the US Constitution abolished slavery?
14.
It was the 13th. Very close. Question 5. What does the acronym ANZAC stand for? ANZAC.
Australian and New Zealand Allied Command.
Incorrect. It's the Australian New Zealand Army Corps. Oh. Right countries, but wrong body. Question 6. Hitler was an adopted surname chosen by the famous one's father in the 1870s. What was their family name before this?
It's on the tip of my tongue. No, I can't remember. Can't remember that.
Schicklgruber.
Oh yes, yeah.
Question 7. In 1066, William of Normandy and Harold Godwinson were the two main contenders to the English throne. Can you name one other contender?
Can you repeat the question?
In 1066, there were two main contenders for the English throne, William of Normandy and Harold Godwinson. Can you name one other contender to the throne in 1066?
No, I don't know that either. Oh.
Edgar the Atheling or Harold Hardrada?
Oh.
Question 8. Orchestrated from Dover Castle in 1940, what was the code name for the evacuation from Dunkirk?
Oh, that's a hard one as well. Oh.
It's student mastermind, not student mediocre mind.
No, I'm going to have to pass that one as well.
Operation Dynamo. Question 9. Who founded the Eagle Forum, a conservative political interest group in the US, and successfully campaigned against the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment?
I want to say Woodrow Wilson, but I don't think it's right.
It's not. It's Phyllis Schlafly. Oh. Question 10. Which British Prime Minister said the following? If you just set out to be liked, you will be prepared to compromise on anything at any time and would achieve nothing.
I'm going to say Winston Churchill on that, because I just have no idea. I have no idea whatsoever.
Incorrect. That was Margaret Thatcher.
Oh.
It's tough. Some tough questions there.
That was a tougher round. I mean, I listened to last week's just before now, and this was hard.
Oh, it's claiming conspiracy now.
Yeah, it is.
Come
yeah.
on,
Bob. There was some debate ahead of this about how difficult they were, and we actually did think these were in line actually with last week's.
Oh.
I would just like to apologise to any members of the Hitler family who consider themselves more famous than Adolf Hitler, in case I have accidentally undermined their fame. I may be incorrect that Adolf was the most famous member of the Hitler family.
Interesting fact is that Hitler was also not the name chosen by Alwar. It was Hiedler, and it was a bureaucratic mistake, and it was written down as Hitler. So change history.
Mrs. Hughes, during that, you just disappeared off screen for a bit. Have you literally gone and Googled? Like
no, I went to shut the door. I went to shut the door because I didn't want to be interrupted.
Bob, you have a total there of 6 points, which puts you third on the leaderboard currently. Excellent on 1980s music, and we'll say that you've forgotten some of what you've learned in Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 at school as well. We'll be kind, because you're so focused on your A-level studies. But
exactly.
Well done. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for coming back after the technical issue as well. Oh, see you later, Bob.
See you later, Bob. Good night.
Also, another interesting fact is that, you talked about King Idris. The word Idris is Arabic and Welsh, and Idris means great or king. So there you go.
It does seem
it means the same thing in both languages.
Yeah. I looked it up because I was quite interested in Idris Elba, and my favourite mountain in Wales is Cadair Idris. So I was like, oh, where's that come from? So I had a look. There you go.
So skirting over the fascination of Idris Elba, and also the fact that Anna has clearly got out in front of her, just like David Brent from The Office, an encyclopedia. Sorry, Anna.
I think.
How dare you doubt my knowledge?
Just next to her, just saying, you need to Google that. I want to say something. Google that. And that's what's going on.
It's all in here, all of it.
Yeah, true.
Rightio, guys. So we are moving on now to historical top trumps, which is memorials and monuments. Now, as we all know, we all enjoy our trips where we get to see kind of history being alive. We love it. And it's one of the reasons I think, Mr. Hall, and this is not a joke, is it, that you became a history teacher, that you could have become an English teacher, but you thought to yourself, history is where I'm going to get more trips.
That's literally it. When I was considering my options, I always knew I wanted to be a teacher. One of the key driving factors in why I chose history over English or drama, which were the other things I considered, was I figured as a history teacher I'd be more likely to travel the world. And I was proved exactly right. I've been all over the world with this department. So I definitely made the right call in that regard.
Similar to you, Mr. Hall, when I actually going back a bit further, the only reason I chose history GCSE was because there were 2 trips. Otherwise, I would have been doing art because I was really good at shading apples. My teacher said.
Shading apples?
Oh, literally getting an apple and shading it, drawing an apple.
It's quite niche. Quite niche as a skill.
Yeah, it could have been my niche.
But in all seriousness, I think that we've all missed the trips, and
absolutely,
it has been very sad. But this is our attempt at getting a little bit of those trips, a reminder of those trips and some of the things we've seen there as well. So as I said, a historical top trumps this week is memorials and monuments. Again, it's quite loose whether we think they're the best or our favourite or significant in some way. And this week we have some visuals to go along with what we're looking at as well. We're going to start with Mr. Hughes, I think.
I'm going to have to take off my sunglasses and hat for this just to go.
Oh no, they really add to the look.
Well, again, I'm disappointed in all of you because, again, the checks have been rolling in this week. The reason I'm wearing this is I've just booked my 2022 Caribbean holiday based off the success of the last 2 weeks. So I thought,
get ready. There we go. So, Mr. Hughes, what are you going for?
Right. Like you, like all of us, we talked this week about how difficult this actually is. And I think there are episodes in the future that we can do on monuments and memorials just in a certain area or a certain battle or war, whatever. Just had this idea about a city that I visited twice, And it really struck me in itself as a memorial, a monument to American history. And it's Montgomery in Alabama. Now, it's the capital city of Alabama. It's a really small city. I mean, Mr. Hall's been there with me on a school trip, and we walked it probably about an hour or so, didn't we? I would say,
Yeah,
like that. And what's fascinating about it is you can walk from the top of Montgomery down to the bottom, and you're covering like 150 years, if not more, of American history in that hour walk. It's really dripping in 19th and 20th century history. Now here, I mean, just example, 1861, the first capital of the Confederacy, first White House of the Confederacy. Jefferson Davis is sworn in actually on the steps of the state capitol that we'll see, I think, in a moment. And that in itself makes Montgomery interesting. It was named after, I didn't actually realize this until about an hour before on Wikipedia, obviously, that it was named, Montgomery's named as well after a Revolutionary War general. So just the fact it's named after somebody to do the Revolutionary War was interesting. But first White House of the Confederacy, I mean, keep going on with the PowerPoints, Mr. Brown. I'll try and show you some ideas here. One of my favourite places we visited was the, I'll get this wrong, Southern Poverty Law Centre. That's what I'm stood outside there. A much different version of me that I'm sure we can comment on in a moment. And the Southern Poverty Law Centre is still a site of heightened terror attack by right-wing extremists. It's a centre that's been working for African-American civil rights justice for a long, long time. But outside it is this beautiful civil rights memorial, this sort of granite circular memorial with all the key dates from the civil rights movement, water flowing down. It's supposed to be linked to MLK's quote there, until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. I really liked it. It was a place that went in, Adam, where you could put your comments and your names up on the interactive board. Fascinating place. So that's at the top of, if I can sort of picture a main street in a sort of government capital city in a state. You've got the Capitol building up at the top of Montgomery, and this is about 5-10 minutes walk from it, and then the main street carries down, which is Dexter Avenue. Just outside the Capitol building is this, a controversial memorial. This is the Confederate Memorial Monument. It's a memorial to over 120,000 Alabamians? People from Alabama who fought for the Confederacy in the Civil War. Now, I was quite struck by this memorial. I remember sitting there and trying to contemplate what I thought about it. Here's a memorial to soldiers fighting for the Confederacy, fighting for their home state of Alabama. What was interesting, if you look around it, you can see two there of the three Confederate flags throughout the war. There's also the battle flag from the Confederacy as well. Those four flags were taken down in 2015, actually, following the Charleston shooting, I think. Controversial. It's a debate we've had with sixth formers many, many times about whether it's appropriate to fly Confederate flags or not. But for me, as a memorial to American history, it's another example. So we've got lots of civil rights history in Montgomery. We've also got masses of Civil War history there too, and lots of debating points. Go on, Seth. And of course, 1955, Rosa Parks Montgomery bus boycott. That was one of my favourite museums we went to, Adam. Remember, we sat there, and I think it was an opening video or something, and then the whole sort of wall opened up, and then you walked in this brilliant museum about Rosa Parks. This is just outside of the museum. And what Montgomery has is a great sort of walking tour as well of the city. It takes you around the Civil War, civil rights aspects of it, also the slavery aspects that I'll come to in a moment. It's just, I don't think I've ever walked anywhere, which is such a small city, where I could spend an entire day teaching. And this is a slight cheat, is this one. We're actually in Selma here, and here's Mr. Eddie Long, who we had in our Historia the other day. And I cannot remember the name of this chap who showed us around the museum. It's a small museum in Selma, but of course, we went there just after visiting Montgomery because of the Selma to Montgomery March led by MLK in '65 to petition Governor George Wallace to allow voter registration. But I wanted to put this up. I know it's something that really struck us, I think, didn't it, Adam?
Yeah, it was it was the fact that we sort of had this tour, and he showed us part of the museum, which was a mock-up of a cell that a lot of the protesters had been thrown into. And it was the way he just casually threw in, and so this is just like the cells we were kept in that night. And there was that moment where we all just looked at him and were like, well, right, you were there. And just having that direct link to these events that we study was humbling.
Absolutely. Yeah, he was, I can't remember how old he was. He was quite young. He was a young lad out in the streets when the police sort of charged and threw the gas into the marchers. And he was right there alongside the Edmund Pettus Bridge, as is. Yeah. So here we're actually in the Alabama State Capitol. The Alabama State Capitol itself is a beautiful building. It sort of does. I mean, it looks similar to most state capitol. It replicates the Capitol in DC. And this chap as well was also on the Selma to Montgomery march. I remember him vividly saying to us that he was hoping he'd live long enough to see the 50th anniversary of it. And he'd actually written into his will that if he died near enough to the, there's going to be a big anniversary march, Barack Obama was going to be on it, amongst other civil rights leaders from the past too, that he wanted his coffin to be carried on that march. And I've got no idea if he lived to see it, and I really hope he did. But he was a brilliant tour guide who took us around the state capitol. The thing that struck me is that when we teach, when it comes into our teaching, really, it's about Governor George Wallace and the Selma to Montgomery march. And as I said before, MLK petitioning to allow voter registration, which influences, puts pressure on, is part of the campaign, which ultimately becomes the Voting Rights Act in '65. But this chap, again, I wish I could remember his name, and I can't. He was really quite positive about Wallace because he wanted to talk about how Wallace changed his views in his later life. So there was an assassination attempt on Wallace, and I can't tell you the year, but I know by the late 1970s he'd become a born-again Christian. He'd apologized to lots of civil rights leaders. He's sort of renounced his segregationist views, and then he won another term to office after this sort of change in heart and change in beliefs. And I remember this, I can't remember the exact quotation, but he said he wanted to apologize, seeking power and glory through his life, just trying to use that sort of southern dixiecrat vote to win the presidency. And now he just wanted to seek love and forgiveness for his earlier views, which is amazing, really. And yeah, this is the sort of focal point here. This is the Alabama State Capitol building. It's the site of where Jefferson Davis was sworn in as the Confederacy president, just on those steps in the lead up there to the entranceway. It's the site of the end of Selma to Montgomery March. Just round the side of there is the Confederacy Soldier Memorial. It's unbelievable how much history you can teach in such a small place. And here, just down the road from that Capitol building, is Dexter Street Church, where Pastor MLK got his first major position as a pastor and would help lead the, well, he set up the Montgomery Improvement Association and led the bus boycott. In Montgomery as well, you've got lots of other things. There's a major freedom ride attempt there in 1961, where police collaborated to help attack freedom riders who were waiting at the Greyhound bus station. Have we got a picture down near the river? I can't remember if I sent you one.
I don't think we have, not one.
Okay.
That was,
If you headed down the road there, so if you can see where I am, if I was walking straight down, I'd be heading down the main stretch, so down what is called Dexter Avenue. Behind me is the Alabama State Capitol. If I keep going all the way down, you get to a sort of a little roundabout. And there, just near there, was where there was one of the largest slave auction sites in the South. Then you walk around the corner and you get to the Alabama River, which is where slaves were brought in to be auctioned off at that site. Just amazing. I mean, you could teach, there's American military history there, there's obviously the Confederacy history there, there's slave auction history there, there's modern politics. Yeah. I really, really, really like visiting Alabama. I've only been twice to the state. It's one of my favorite places to have visited. And Montgomery is somewhere I hope to get back to as soon as I can. There's actually 2 years ago, I can't wait to see it, and I urge everybody to have a look at it. It looks brilliant. There's a new slavery legacy museum. It's got an amazing new National Memorial for Peace and Justice. Really sort of trying to remember and represent all those who lost their lives through for being hung, really. It's brutal, but really effective. So it's a lynching memorial, I suppose. And it's rows of steel columns sort of hanging from the roof with areas around America and the names of those who were lynched in those areas. And the size of each column is about 6 foot to represent a person. So I can't wait to visit there. It sounds astonishing. And just to lift the mood slightly, Adam, you might remember down that road, if we go a little bit further along on the left-hand side, there is, I think, the longest running family-owned restaurant in Alabama, which is Chris's famous hot dogs. And we went there for lunch, and you got a burger and a hot dog, a real sort of sloppy burger and hot dog with loads of chili sauce and stuff on top. But it's brilliant because FDR, apparently, when he passed through Montgomery, there's a train station. We made the train stop, and then got him hot dogs and burgers from there. Harry Truman went there, MLK went there, both President Bushes have been there, Scott Fitzgerald's been there. There's a massive list of people who've gone and eaten there. And it was a great place to go. And it was really sort of, really, yeah, it wasn't necessarily the most modern looking of restaurants I've ever been to, but it was a great place to go. So I give to you, for me, one of my favourite small cities I've ever visited that encapsulates so much about the America that we teach, Montgomery, Alabama.
I love that. I haven't been myself, and
I'll take you.
I hope to go. Obviously, we want to do a trip, our usual kind of USA trip, and that the plan was for the next one to be a deep south trip as well. And obviously, we'll have to see how that goes and change things, and maybe just a DC trip. But I genuinely really want to go, and I love this idea of a city encapsulating like a time capsule, a microcosm of all of American history. It sounds absolutely amazing. And I have to say, like Ed did last week, actually, during our Historia, before I taught at Bockington School, my knowledge of American history was pretty limited, but I've been so fascinated by the trips we've gone on, by being able to teach it as well. And now I see it as one area of the past that is probably one of my favorite bits to study as well. When you talk about that, lynching memorial as well, it reminds me of one I saw in Namibia in Windhoek as well, which was it was very shocking actually, and it was in your face. I think it's on purpose, and it was remembering the first genocide, arguably, of the 20th century in German Southwest Africa. And there you have a statue, which is one of freedom and glory. On the top, you got these people kind of standing defiant against the German oppressors and all those people who've tried to oppress Namibia, including the South Africans. And underneath, you've got these plaques where you've got people hanging and shot on the ground, and it's just in your face, really. Yeah, really, really interesting. That really interesting city to look at, and I'd said love to go.
Adam, what did you think of visiting that?
Yeah,
like you, it was one of these that just it was that sense of walking around and being able to link it, because obviously as history teachers we study an awful lot of things, but it's very rare that we get to be very close to it, and being able to actually meet the people and stand at the bus stop and stand in. We went into the church in that picture, and standing in these places. That's what I absolutely love about these trips that we go on. And it is, Joe, and you're absolutely right. Montgomery is one of these places that where you just stand there and you're like, right, okay, so just that bit over there is where this happened, and that building's where this happened. And having that hook and that link. And you mentioned the state historian for the Capitol building, who just in his introduction to us very casually threw, welcome, I'm the state historian. I wasn't allowed in this building 50 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's that moment where you go, right, this is history come to life in front of you. This is where you can stand and touch it and shake its hand. Like, it's incredible for that.
And what I really liked about that trip, and it is one where we need to do this again, is this isn't somewhere where British schools usually visit. We were really off sort of normal America history trip travels, to the extent that I remember walking down and going, we're not booked into Dex Avenue. I want church. I wonder if we can go in. I don't know. We sort of went in, and there was some kind of music rehearsal going on. And this lady came and says, "Oh, hi." I was just sort of explaining, "Oh, I'll bring them all in. We've got to go and have a little walk around, have a look around at MLK's old church." It was brilliant. I absolutely loved it. And I just can't wait to go back there. Would it be about 8 years ago, I suppose, now?
Judging by your neck and hair, yeah.
I don't know who that is.
You look like a fuzzy Pez dispenser.
That is a shocking, but I can't even process it. I'll be honest with you. It doesn't look like you in any way.
I'm a very different me these days. Yeah.
Are indeed. We will be back, and I think we probably going to do some episodes in the future about some of our favorite places we have visited on our trips as well, because as you'll see, the First World War is talked about in this in this podcast, but not as much as we probably would think we would as well. So we'll probably do something on that. Anyway, next up is Mrs Hughes, talking about her favourite monument, a very interesting one nonetheless.
Right. So obviously you've got your grand memorials, you've got your memorials where they tell a story, where people show you round, where you gain an insight into history. And then you get the memorials where the history actually isn't revealed until you delve a bit deeper into it yourself. And it's this memorial here, which everybody calls the statue of Eros on Piccadilly Circus, is so iconic. So many people will have been there, met there, will recognize it if they see it. And yet everybody's interpretation and everybody's idea of it is completely wrong. And also the person who it's a memorial to is very hidden. And that's what I like about this one in particular, is because the man himself that the memorial is about is the Earl of Shaftesbury. And he's somebody who was very humble, had his own mental instabilities, and yet he pursued a goal that was so key at this time of empire, this time of growth. And he began to try and support and bring awareness to people about the poor, you know, the hidden people that did shape the whole of Britain at the time, but were mistreated and undervalued. And he tried to give value to these people. And I'm going to explore a little bit of him and why the memorial is so interesting because of that. So this is actually the anti-Eros. So the artist, Alfred Gilbert, when he made it, he said he didn't want Eros and Cupid. He chose Eros's brother, anti-Eros. The artist said they were frivolous tyrants, and the idea of anti-Eros is a god of selfless love, which fits very well with Anthony Ashley Cooper, the man that it's written about. He was selfless and he was humble. So I'll get back to what the memorial is and how it's made. I just want to whiz through his history, I suppose, tiny bit if I can. So who was he? He was an earl, so landed gentry, very wealthy, had the typical rather unsatisfying life of an earl, didn't know his parents, grew up rather lonely. The only sort of contact he had, the only real love he had of sort of family love was his housekeeper, who was known as Maria Millis, and she was quite a strong evangelical Christian, and she embodied in him this idea of Christian love as well, I suppose, and it was his evangelical fervor that pushed him and also gave him these philanthropic tendencies as well, and pushed him towards education, which I'll get back to a little bit later. He did the traditional things, went to school, went to Harrow, went to Oxford, travelled the continent, until he finally ended up as, very traditionally again, a member of Parliament. At age 25, he became a member of Parliament in the House of Commons. But it was here he began to, transcend that idea of his earldom and became somebody who really pushed for those weaker than him. Now, in all my research, I couldn't find at what point this idea of helping the poor and supporting the poor came from, whether it's something he'd seen or he'd witnessed, or whether it was something that came from his religious ideas, his evangelical ideas of helping the meek and the mild. It's not clear where it came from, but he pushed laws through, he pushed bills through the Commons. And the difference with him is that he didn't just push the laws through and bring them to the knowledge of all the other MPs. What he also did is he encouraged inspections, because many laws were being passed at the time, but they were agreed and granted, and then nobody checked whether these laws were actually happening. So the Factory Acts, the Mental Health Acts, they were all being paid lip service to, but nobody actually then went into the institutions to check that these laws were being adhered to, and many terrible things kept happening. So he introduced the mental health law, secured the passage of the Lunacy Act, to treat the insane as persons of an unsound mind and not social outcasts, to actually acknowledge that this is not something that they have brought upon themselves. This is something that is innate and possibly incurable and needed support rather than ostracization. Factory reform, shortening the days, the Lord Ashley Act, the Mines Act as well, that no children under 10 should be able to work in the mines. Many other things, sponsored low-cost housing projects, education, set up the ragged schools, was a vocal opponent of slavery. Such a list of positive things. The poor called him our Earl. They recognised him as somebody who made all these changes and put all of these changes into place. And not only that, enforced these changes, made sure that they happened and made sure that things did improve for people. And I wonder whether it was partly his own personality. He was a depressive. He had his own struggles with mental instability. So perhaps he felt closer, could understand more the insane, could get to grips with what people were actually going through. And these changes, you know, this humble nature is all in this memorial, because he was so well known that when he was, they said to him, you know, can we give you an enormous statue or a memorial in Westminster Abbey? And he said no. So he refused to be honoured. He didn't want to be seen. He wanted to carry on behind the scenes. And so instead, this statue was made. And this statue was meant to be functional. It was a fountain. Water poured out of it. There were little cups attached by chains. Sadly, it never really worked very well. It was too narrow at the base. The water went everywhere, created a muddy cesspool around it, and people nicked all the cups. So that was rather unfortunate to start off with. The person who built it actually ended up paying for it. He was only paid $3,000 and it cost $7,000 to actually make. But it is one of the first ever cast aluminium statues in the world. So it embodies this idea of empire and innovation as well. These new materials. That's why it has this sort of light, weightless flight to it that you didn't get in the heavy cast iron statues from before. So, you know, I think it has a kind of sly smile to it. It's here and everybody knows it and everybody is aware of it. It's iconic, and yet hidden behind it is the story of a very humble, a very lonely, a very sad man who actually changed the lives of many of the poor and many of the oppressed in Britain. And that's why I think this is so important to me. You know, the poor lined the streets when his coffin travelled through the country and to its final resting place. And this symbolises it completely. You know, this the anti-eros, the humility behind who he was, but the amazing things that he did for the world, for Britain, and certainly.
That's Anna. That's absolutely brilliant. There, I mean, fascinating,
absolutely awesome. Thank you, Anna.
Research there on the Earl of Shaftesbury. I mean, I didn't know anything really about that.
Wow.
And, he is an amazing. So he's the embodiment of this positive paternalism that is possible, you know, at the time. And he is, absolutely fantastic character. And thank you for sort of making me research it, because it is something that is in plain sight that we take for granted when we go to London. And you see the people in this picture, don't you, sitting there. And I look
all with their backs to it.
All with their backs to it, interestingly as well. And it's interesting to hear the controversies I looked into, actually. The kind of the fact that when it was made, it became this magnet for vandalism. You mentioned those cups, you know, that were smashed after the first day, some of them, or stolen, which is really sad. And the fact that even now at Christmas time, they have to try and protect it, and they try and do different things. Once they tried to make it into a snow globe, but that went badly wrong because of the wind. And there's this idea that's developed, there's a cursed statue in some way, that it's like, it's got this past where it's got this fantastic individual it's supposed to memorialize, but actually no one knows that. And I know it's because he's humble, but for me, it shows us the difficulties of memorializing things and what it can tell us about the time in which it was created as well. Yes, it's this aluminium statue, you know, the fact that it can stand on one foot is because it's an aluminium. It's groundbreaking in that way. But it got me thinking also about this idea of, you know, we interpret memorials at different times in different ways. And I look at this boy who's standing on here. Apparently the model was a 15-year-old boy, an Anglo-Italian artist, studio assistant. And I think to myself, are there questions about this? You know, the sexualization of a boy. And it reminded me of the controversy that went on quite recently in the Manchester Art Gallery around the painting of the Hylas and the nymphs. And this is a very famous, infamous painting where you've got Hylas being tempted in by these nymphs. And these nymphs are, you know, pubescent girls. That's what they're painted as. And it was removed actually by the art gallery. And they said at the time, put up post-it notes where it used to be, telling us about your opinions on this. And it caused controversy. Some people were like, it shouldn't have been removed, put it back up. But it's interesting how memorials change. They change in the time that we're receiving them, and we see them in different ways. And also, when we get this extra information about them, it completely changes the way we think about them. So now when I see this, I will think of the Earl of Shaftesbury. I'm not going to think about this kind of controversy and the hooliganism, because of you've basically championed him there, Anna. So thank you once again. Absolutely fantastic.
I love that point you just said, Callum. I was reading something very similar recently, where memorials are passive, or they very much are a conversation between people and something. So they can reflect their time, you can challenge their time, or it can be absolutely nothing to you.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
But it's the same with the idea of philanthropy in itself, that you know, the reason, you know, Lord Ashley Cooper was a philanthropist, but many people were philanthropists, and many of them just because they could afford to throw money at what was seen as a worthy cause. They still had this idea of worthy poor and unworthy poor. And then you had Henry Mayhew who wrote it all down to make people aware, but you had a lot of philanthropists who never really made changes for any other reason other than to, you know, to big themselves up, just to put it simply. And he did make those changes, and he enforced them and carried on his inspection, so made sure that they happened. And yet he never really wanted to be acknowledged as the philanthropist that he was, or the person that he was. And that's interested me as well.
Oh, so much good stuff there. I've read that worthy poor and unworthy. It's fascinating. Really, really interesting.
Absolutely fascinating. So thank you so much for that, Anna. It's fascinating.
Yeah,
we'll have you back on again. Now we will turn to
you passed the test. Well done.
Absolute flying colours. We will now turn to Mr Hall, and I have to say, this is actually one of my favourite places.
Oh, brilliant! What a choice!
Now, this is the first time that I really struggled with which one to choose, because there's a few different sort of things that occur to you. Like similar, actually, Anna, you've reminded me of one of the things I was, because I really love like just these tiny little random memorials you get. Sort of you get them sort of squirreled away on plaques in the corner of churches. There's some local worthy. There's one in Beverley Minster. I can't remember the details. I couldn't find it. There's one in Beverley Minster, which is a memorial to a woman who died having warned them about a fire in the Minster. The local little sort of, I love the local village memorials to like the 4 blokes from that village who went away to World War I. I really like those obscure, tiny little memorials because of what they represent. But I did pick San Symphorion Military Cemetery on the Western Front, which there's a number of reasons for it. One is very, very personal. It is one of my absolute favorite places on the Western Front. It is one of the first sites I visited with a Pocklington School battlefields trip. It is a prominent chapter in my favorite First World War battlefields guide book, Battlefields Made Easy by Mr Gareth Hughes.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much.
And it also has some really interesting features to it. So obviously the Commonwealth War Graves, you can pick any of their cemeteries and you will pick a significant, interesting site. And I love the Commonwealth War Graves cemeteries generally. It's a really weird sentence to say, I realise. But so much thought was put into their design and their planning. So much thought was put into the headstones themselves, this very deliberately regimented style. And when you go to a lot of them, you see these sort of, particularly in the bigger ones, where you see these sort of rows upon rows of neatly laid out regimented headstones. It really does, even after visiting them dozens of times now, you still have a genuine emotional reaction to them. But San Symphorion is slightly different because of how it was originally designed, because of how it was originally laid out. You don't have these sort of very neat row after row after row. The whole area is set out like a series of gardens with the headstones, a lot of them lying pretty much as they were designed when it was first put together. And so that is one of the reasons I love it, is that you've got this very genuine feel of a country garden with its own sort of small, quiet areas. It is also a site of really some quite significant history, and by accident rather than by design. The sort of inhabitants, I suppose. What's the correct term for this?
Those interred there, I suppose.
The interned.
Yeah. You've got the first and last Commonwealth soldiers killed in action in the war. You've got the first posthumous recipient of the VC. You've got the first Iron Cross recipient.
Yeah.
And particularly on the first two, where you've got the first and last Allied casualties of the war, they're next to each other. They're within 10 meters or so. And this was never designed. This was never planned like this. It wasn't meant to be like that. It's also, and thank you for putting that photo, Mr. Braidwood. It's also got this really interesting setup where there is a German memorial to the Royal Middlesex Regiment, and the Royal Middlesex Regiment didn't exist. It was a memorial put up by the German army in recognition of how well this unit had fought. And that, in some ways, encapsulates, I suppose, almost the gentlemanly conduct of the early phases of World War I. Obviously, it didn't last, but it sort of brings to light these ideas of, you know, the famous Christmas truce, this sort of this sort of brothers in arms way of fighting the war, even across the Western Front. And so I choose San Symphorion for a very simple reason. It is my favorite place because it has so many elements of what we find fascinating about for the First World War. So many elements of what makes the Commonwealth War Grave site so special to be in. And it's just got these wonderful little snapshots of history. You know, when we go there, we go from grave to grave and we tell the stories of these individuals. Because of course, when you look at the numbers, the sheer scale of World War I, particularly when we take the sort of the third years to it, it's vitally important to stop and tell the individual stories, to remind people that every headstone here was a human being. They were an individual who fought and died and had families and friends. And this place really encapsulates that for me.
I couldn't agree more. Absolutely couldn't agree more. What an absolutely beautiful place. Has a feeling of this kind of beautiful country garden, but kind of rambling, but it's incredible. And just how much history and how many stories are there. And I feel exactly the same way as you, Mr. Hall, about the Commonwealth War Graves. And again, I feel privileged that, and this, I have to say, and this is a heartfelt thanks to Mr. Hughes for kind of introducing me to the First World War and the memorialization of the First World War and everything that goes on there. I am now absolutely fascinated by it. It's a pilgrimage I try and make every year, at least once now. And unfortunately, again, we've not been lucky to do that. But I feel the same way in many respects about Dud Corner. Dud Corner was the first Commonwealth War Grave Cemetery I went to. And a really lovely site up there, beautiful, kind of perched up on a bit of a rise. And the memorial that's there is fascinating. Some great stories in that cemetery. But yeah, San Symphorion, if you haven't been, go and visit. And go and look around Mons. The museum there now is absolutely fantastic. It had I think it had a bit of a refurb for the centenary, so it's brilliant. And of course, you can walk that city and walk in the footsteps of the BEF. You can go where obviously Dees and Godley, where they obviously won the VCs there as well. You can go on to
rub the head of the monkey in the town square.
You can rub the head of the monkey as well, which is not a euphemism. It is a wonderful little monkey on the town hall. But no, genuinely, if you haven't been to Mons, please do go. It is absolutely brilliant place.
Can I just say something here? Well, you know my views on San Symphorion. It is my favourite cemetery to visit, and you've both encapsulated it perfectly. And I think something you just said there, Callum, is important. I say, you know, the reason why we often get drawn in and love areas of history is not because we've decided to research it. It's something that's gripped us. And the reason why I love visiting the First World War sites and cemeteries and I think is because of history teachers that taught me. And start, you know, a brief shout out to my teachers at Silcote School. And then when I first started teaching, who were teachers who took me on these trips as a very junior member of staff, exactly the same as I hope I've passed on to others too. But what a great choice, Adam. Fantastic. You know, Nehemiah, Price, Ellison in there. It's a little bit bizarrely like Montgomery, where you can walk a place, tell the story for hours if you wanted to. It's everything in there. And it's just a beautiful place. It's so good.
You know, looking at, I've been to many of the other ones, obviously, ones around Normandy, but this one, just from the pictures, it seems to have a very intimate atmosphere. Everything is very enclosed. You can see even from this picture, there are 3 separate areas, you know, circular, whereas everything else I've seen is very linear. And this one, like you said, the little gardens, it seems to have a very special atmosphere, and that's just from looking at pictures.
It really does. The approach to it as well is down this little lane, and you kind of go up these grand steps into it. And there are more areas than this, Anna. There are a number of different kind of terraces almost where you walk up to, and it's just a place to contemplate and be peaceful. And I think that is actually the feeling of a lot of these cemeteries as well. They are peaceful places. They're places just to kind of, remember and just to tell the stories about the First World War.
Just to contemplate and be. It's great. It's a wonderful place.
Now this is, I'm not going to tell you straight away what my memorial and monument is, but of course we've got another Commonwealth War Graves site here as well. This is Whitechapel's. It's the largest one in France, I believe, isn't it, Mr Hughes?
Yeah, probably. Do you know? You've caught me out there. I think it is. Yeah,
I think it is. I think it is the largest one in France. And I went there on a battlefields trip for my dad's 60th birthday. So I took him with my now wife, and it was absolutely brilliant. And I'd never been there before. And this site is absolutely enormous. It's a bit like Tyne Cot in its enormity. But again, you could tell the whole story of the war here, because I imagine it's got burials from 1914 all the way up to 1918 as well. It's absolutely incredible site. This is not the memorial I want to choose though, but I want to say that this site in Whitechapel's was the home to the British Army's kind of main hospital in France. It was also the training ground as well. Infamously, obviously, there's a rebellion there, a mutiny, mainly by Commonwealth troops. It's the only time we get in the British Army a little mutiny, but it's relatively small, right? But in 1917, February of 1917, a strange disease started to break out among some of the British troops there. And it was resistant to any of the medical care that could be given. First of all, they thought it was like bronchitis, but actually it wasn't bronchitis, because when they did some of the autopsies, they found that it didn't have any of the signs of bronchitis. There was this kind of putrescent pus in every one of the bronchi at the base of the lungs. They were kind of coughing up this pus and a bit of blood. And also, and this is the telltale sign, many of those who were dying had what was called heliotrope cyanosis, or the kind of the blue death, where they had blue marks on their body that slowly turned to kind of this purple mahogany color as the oxygen basically leached out of their body. And it was about 20, 30 men who died of this in 1917. And we don't think of 1917 as the start of this, but this is what we now, and some people say this is where it did start, although many others have theories about it starting in America, in some camps in America, or potentially in China as well, or somewhere in that area. But this is the Spanish flu. This is one of the kind of outbreaks. And there was a number of outbreaks of Spanish flu during this period. And of course, it called the Spanish flu because in one of the earlier outbreaks, the Spanish press, the king got a bout of it, and a number of other people got a bout of it, neutral, and they could obviously speak quite openly about the Spanish flu, whereas other countries couldn't, because of the impact they thought it would have on morale, hence why it gets the name the Spanish flu. But also there's this kind of moniker that's attached to it. It's a Spanish lady, this kind of lady that is mysterious and tempts people and spreads disease like a prostitute. It's that idea as well that kind of becomes attached to it. And I was struck. I wanted to choose a memorial that's a bit different, and I haven't actually seen the memorial I'm going to choose. But the other day, Boris Johnson obviously gave his press conference and announced that we've now reached 100,000 people who have died. And I listened to something on Radio 4 about it, and I think we should call them people, because each one of them is an individual who's died in this country from the absolutely terrible COVID-19 pandemic. And it made me think, because he started talking about, we will remember the key workers, the teachers, the nurses, the doctors, those people who have kept the country running, and those people who've died. But what does memorialization of a pandemic look like? It's a very difficult one, because the Spanish flu, Spanish influenza, whatever you want to call it, is a forgotten sort of event for many people. Yet it killed anywhere from, low estimate, 17 million up to over 100 million people. We're talking about a death rate much higher than COVID-19 of, 5 to 20% of the people. During its most worst phase, basically in the winter going into the spring of 1918 into 1919, 2,500 people a week were dying in London. So we're talking about something that was truly horrendous. And it was shocking because, unlike COVID-19, unlike other outbreaks of flu, this affected often not the very, very young and the very, very old and those who are weak. It actually affected young people and people probably of our age as well, because it kind of hijacked the body system. And there was sort of, yeah, it basically hijacked it. I'm not going to go into the science too much because I'm on shaky ground myself there. And that shocked people. They didn't really understand what was going on because they didn't have a grasp of virology at the time as well. They thought that it was, you know, a bacteria that they couldn't see that was too small. It was going to take until the 1930s for them to develop some knowledge of this. But it, yeah, as I said, it got me thinking about the forgotten nature of this and whether it was memorialized. And it reminded me of a book I read. It was a book called Pandemic 1918 by Catherine Arnold. There's also another one by Spinney called Pale Rider. And I would massively recommend these books. And I was reading one of them last night. I was reading Pandemic 1918, and it's quite sad because it's looking ahead and says, well, this is how we could avoid a future pandemic. And it's, in hindsight, it's, yeah, quite sad. But it reminded me of a memorial that I saw in one of these books. And it's this memorial here. This is the influenza pandemic window, to give it its full name, Heroes and Heroines 1918 to 1919. It was designed by a guy called Johannes Schreiter, who's a graphic artist, a German graphic artist. And it is tucked away, like literally tucked away in the medical library of the Royal London Hospital in a chapel there. And this makes up a set of 8 panels on different medical themes. And all of them are triptych. So there's 3 kind of windows there. You've got one to the Elephant Man, John Merrick, who died in that hospital as well. You've got one on HIV and AIDS. And you've got a range of others for specialist, you know, medical areas as well. And I think this is kind of beautiful, even though it is very humble, and it's quite shocking that we don't have more memorials to the Spanish flu. So we've got these 3 windows here. So you've got the purple and the blue here. So some people, and this again is about interpretation, how we interpret it. People looking at this window might say, well, the purple and the blue are reminiscent of this heliotrope cyanosis, this blue color that was so evocative of the Spanish flu and how it turned into mahogany. And once you got that, you were basically going to die. But we'll talk about that in a second. But they've got this blue and purple color of the windows there, of the prominent features, of course. Then you've got the white at the other side with a chemical there as well. Now, apparently, the reference, these colours are unintentional. So Professor Oxford, who is the Emeritus Professor of Virology at Barts, London School of Medicine and Dentistry, he was key in making this happen and commissioning this and getting it sorted. And he says actually that it wasn't that. It was he was influenced in the colour choices, and so was the artist, by Gauguin's final masterpiece as well. And it's kind of a mystery, this masterpiece in many respects, but it is clearly very symbolic and uses colour in different ways. But apparently, and I'm doing a bit of research on this, church windows have ancient symbolism, and the colours of church windows mean quite a lot. So, for example, if you have white, you've got the healing fields. You've got the healing fields there as we start to find cures and medicines, antivirals for it. And you've got this kind of chemical symbol here, and it's meant to represent hope. You've got a neuroaminidase. I probably absolutely butchered the pronunciation of that, but hey, and that's like a contemporary antiviral. And then you've got the other colours as well. So if you look at the kind of blue and purple, you've got things where you've got kind of grief, and you've got the ideas of hope as well. I think obviously the thing that most people are now acutely aware of, and anyone who has gone through COVID-19 will recognize this graph. And you've got this graph here that shows it actually starts in 1890 with the Russian flu pandemic as well. Which obviously I think it killed about 1 million people globally as well. You see a little bit of blood spatter at the bottom, and that's to represent the amount of people who died. And then you've got these other kind of waves of the Spanish flu as well, until it reaches its kind of peak in 1919. And then you see that kind of blood splatter at the end there. And this kind of absolute rise, this vertical rise that took people so much by surprise. But as I said, it's shocking in a sense how limited a trace it's left. There's a memorial in New Zealand to it, but it's just a small kind of black stone over a kind of memorial garden, from what I can understand. But I can't actually think of any other memorials like this. There were books written of it at the time as well. There were lots and lots of books written who were inspired by it. John Steinbeck, obviously famous author of Mice and Men and plenty of other things of the Depression era, he actually contracted Spanish flu, and he said it changed his outlook. The long-term effects of it were quite massive. FDR contracted it on this voyage of a ship called the USS Leviathan, which I'd love to look into a bit more because it sounds absolutely horrendous, the amount of deaths on there. But as I said, after we passed this absolutely horrendous landmark this week of 100,000 deaths, it made me think, how are we going to memorialize COVID-19? How much of a trace is it going to leave in us? in our population, because like the Spanish flu, there's only going to be a limited amount of people, thankfully, who die from it. There's only going to be a limited amount of people in the population who are affected by it. I wonder if the Spanish flu also suffers from the fact that it happened just at the end of the First World War. People were more stoical. People had gone through this horrible experience of losing loved ones, or having kind of people come back changed, whether physically or mentally, and whether memorialization to that took over. But it's just an interesting question to ask. So I give you the Spanish influenza, or the influenza pandemic window, heroes and heroines 1918 to 1919, which I'm going to visit as soon as this pandemic is over itself as well. Any thoughts?
Are the breaks intentional?
Yeah, they're not, that they're designed into the window. I think it might be to give it a kind of contemporary feel, but I don't know, to be completely honest with you, and there's very little out there about it.
I was thinking, oh God, I always say this, and I was reading an article the other day, but it was about the differences with, I think it was Kansas, it must have been Kansas, Missouri, I don't know, the differences in the way that they dealt with the Spanish flu. And they took completely different approaches. One locked down, one did not. But what interesting was the case was when I was looking into further information about it, there's very little out there. It was one article, I think, from JSTOR on it. I actually sort of have the same thought about that as you do, that we living through a situation like this, that thankfully at the moment is not like the Spanish flu. It will affect us personally on many levels. As we know, on a day-to-day basis, it affects us. But what does it mean 10 years down the line, or 20 years down the line? If this was a war, if it was a battle, historians would write over it, they'd interpret it. They're coming from different approaches. They'd argue about the origins of it. That will happen, particularly the scientific community. But you're right. Do these sort of natural phenomena that affect us just as much at times as war, do we write about them in the same ways? I don't think we do.
We don't. And I think actually what you get is fiction writers writing about them through their work or through their art as well. And Egon Schiele was a victim of the Spanish flu as well. You know, this great kind of artist of the start of the 20th century. But we don't. But it's striking, isn't it? Because the language that's used about trying to beat the COVID-19 pandemic is all about those on the front line. So we're talking, we're using military language to explain it. We're using these things to say it's something to beat and destroy. But we might use that language, but we're not going to get the same memorials out of it, are we? We will remember it in some way. We will memorialize it. But I wonder how much of an impact it will have, because how many people of that generation were actually asked by historians about their experiences of the Spanish flu? They were asked usually about what was it like on the home front during the First World War? What was it like when you fought at Passchendaele? But just to put the numbers into, I mean, the stark numbers again, more people in Britain died than those that were killed at Passchendaele.
Oh yeah, by a long way.
By a long way. Yeah, like 50,000 more, isn't it? It's ridiculous. So it's just really interesting. I just think it's a really interesting thing. And
I'm not very good on this particular subject, but I believe the wars are not going to affect in behaviours around human beings interacting with each other for about a decade after the Spanish flu, and the fear of catching viruses. Yeah. After that, by the time you got into the obviously late 30s,
I mean, they say in the time I was reading this book again, this is one of the recommendations I give you. It's Catherine Arnold, Pandemic 1918, and in it she's talking about the fact that you see in these pictures from the time these masks and how it looks in there, and we couldn't imagine it today. It looks like a science fiction film, and I was thinking, well, we can imagine it today, and it's how we see events and how it changes by our own experiences again, how we receive events. But something that struck me in there as well, which links to what you said about human behavior, it said that a young San Francisco couple were honeymooning, and they went to see their doctor, and they were chatting to their doctor, and they were quite kind of shy, and they eventually said to him, they were a bit worried obviously about sexual interactions, and they said they kept their masks on in bed. Which is like, it's just how the world changes. And I definitely recommend that book. It's very interesting. And it does talk about contemporary pandemics, obviously not COVID-19. There's a chapter to be added there, I think, but very interesting indeed. Anna,
I
sorry.
remember I was reading something about Noel Coward's Blythe Spirit, because it's just been re-released as a film again, and it's all set around the idea of a séance. And they were saying that people's reaction to death changed massively after the Spanish flu and World War I, because they all coincided with each other. And this idea of communicating with the dead became hugely popular. And they were plotting, the seances and how people were interested in seances with, death rate in different countries, and they obviously mirrored each other. So people wanted to communicate with the people they didn't have anymore through this, these methods, and obviously corresponded with the idea of, less people being in, religion and faith being tested as well. So looking for different ways to communicate with the departed.
That's absolutely right. I mean, what is really interesting is, following the First War Spanish flu, we absolutely know that attendance at church has declined ever since the end of those 2 eras. And that, you can't go, that's exactly the cause, but the correlation is really interesting. Testing of faith. Absolutely testing of faith.
But like Anna's saying, there's this rise in spiritualism. Because a lot of these deaths were so sudden or kind of unexpected, they wanted to desperately contact the dead. And you got the rise of the kind of the charlatans. You got these people who are trying to make money off of grief. And you get people who are desperately trying to believe it. You get, for example, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. He famously really wanted to believe in this. And then you get Houdini falling out with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle because he set out to prove that you couldn't contact the dead. And he offered out, this famous magician, escape artist, to anyone who could prove that what they were doing was real. He offered out a massive monetary reward, and of course no one could prove it, and he revealed the charlatans at work. But it shows this kind of yearning to speak to the dead and to remember it in some way. But it is, I don't know, I don't think it's sad that there's only this, because I think it's unfair to say that, but it's quite strange, isn't it, that so much death, so much like suffering has just got really this in Britain. I don't know. Something to ponder and to think about. Anyway, guys, somehow we're going longer and longer each week. We're not getting.
I was just thinking the exact same thing, man. Also, I was thinking how enjoyable this last hour or so has been.
It's been
lovely. Really enjoyed this one. Really enjoyed it.
Me too as well. I absolutely loved it. My book recommendation this week is related. I've come across this author recently called Keith Lowe, and he writes a lot about the Second World War. And the mythology around the Second World War, particularly about the good guys and the bad guys and why that develops. And last year, 2020, he released a book called Prisoners of History: What Monuments to World War II tell us about our history and ourselves. It is an absolutely fantastic. Sorry, something went a bit strange there. Absolutely fantastic book. I'd recommend it. He takes you through different memorials to the Second World War. You've got the Hiroshima Dome, for example. You've got the Mussolini grave as well. And he talks about the controversies around these things and how important they've become in national identity and in stories that people tell ourselves, nations, about whether we're the good guys or the bad guys. And it's a battlefield story in itself. And there's so much there. Again, I want to visit, and it is genuinely global. Obviously, it has a focus on Europe, but it is genuinely fantastic. And I would, again, highly recommend it.
You know what? One of the monuments I nearly chose was the Moscow Second World War Memorial.
Yeah.
Is that in the book?
Yeah, I think it is. Is it the Mother Russia one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, that's amazing. I went there at night with Jonathan Webb, headmaster of Ripon Grammar School. It's unbelievable. There's flames rising up. It's a huge obelisk type structure. It's guarded by Russian military. It's intense. You don't feel at ease. Yet it's this wonderful memorial to basically. I think I'm right in saying it's on the site of how close the Germans got to Moscow. I think I might be wrong. Apologies, world, if I am, but I think that's where it's cited. It was intimidating.
Apologise to the world.
Yeah, they're watching this, aren't they? That's a great monument, Second World War, from Soviet eyes, from Cold War eyes, just through the experience of the Russians. Wow, great monument.
And that book is fantastic. I mean, there's another one I remember from it. It's a memorial to MacArthur. When he comes ashore, there's this very famous footage of him.
Oh, yeah.
And it's the controversy around that as well and his legacy. and it's very, very interesting. And I would, yeah, as I said, I'd recommend it. Again, if you want to borrow it, world, that's not going to work. But if you guys borrow it,
like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe. Like and subscribe, guys. Yeah, guys, like and subscribe, guys. Yeah. Oh, we've got 3 subscribers, by the way.
We have got 3 subscribers, which is 300 increase.
One of them is my sister.
But it's got to start somewhere. It's got to start somewhere. And we have our historical song recommendation of the week as well. You may not be able to hear it, but we'll give you the recommendation nonetheless. Mr. Hughes.
Yeah, apparently. So I watched back number 2 podcast episode. Really enjoyed it. I thought it was excellent. Particularly the second half, very much enjoyed. And got to the song, and I watched it yesterday, and all was fine. This morning, shout out to one of our regular listeners, Mr. Charlie Lambert, who's enjoyed both our podcasts so far, said, why is there 90 seconds of you just air drumming with no music? Now we've had the music removed. Can I just make a personal plea to YouTube? We're not making any money from this. Literally not making any money from this, obviously. We're merely trying to inform and entertain the world and make lovely little historical links. If we could have the song, even just for a little bit, that would be lovely. Thanks, YouTube. Hashtag like and subscribe. So,
no money's being made though. Hashtag like and subscribe. No
money's being made. This isn't real gold.
It isn't. I can assure you of that.
So, I've got to go through my process of sharing screen again. Hang on a minute.
All right, Grandad. Do you know what's super impressive as well? And I know we had a bet on this, didn't we, Anna and Adam? No WWE references throughout the whole thing.
You know what? I spent ages trying to find a Montgomery, Alabama WWE reference. The nearest I got was there was a house show, which for you wrestling fans will know what that means. Others look it up, in 2019. And that was it. That's all I could find. So
there's no WWE memorials.
Oh, now you could get me started.
No, never mind. I'm sorry I asked. No, sorry.
We're already running very late on this one. Not that I have to say it, very enjoyable. Anyway, Mr. Hughes, over to you.
So I've gone for a little bit of a mashup of themes. Song called. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I really love Tom Petty. I really like Tom Petty. I love it. That is great. And there's a song here called the Jefferson Jericho Blues. It's no link to Chris Jericho, AEW, WWE link. It's, see what I did there. It's actually not one of my favourite songs of his, but historically, it's really quite a cool little song. Did capture it last week. The first first verse in the song, it's quite clearly about Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. So it links nicely to our talk earlier this week from Ed Long. Jericho reference is a biblical reference, and it's an Old Testament reference to the city being defeated by Joshua. And so the whole point of the song is this link between Jericho and the Jeffersons. Why is that a link? Because there was an African-American slave spiritual song called Joshua Fit the Battle of Jericho.
Joshua fit the Battle of Jericho, Jericho,
there you go, Mrs. Hughes, like that. And so this is Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers doing a little riff. It's kind of a jaunty, upbeat blues number, but the blues fits with the slave spiritual idea and the link to Jefferson and Sally Hemingway.
Heming.
So let's do Heming, sorry, not Hemingway, sorry, Heming. And here is about minute and a half of it. Hopefully you'll hear it.
And if it doesn't play, then just go and look at it yourself.
Yeah.
And then come back after a minute, and then
you'll hear our excellent insight. go. Jaunty little blues number. A little bit of a link to Jefferson. A little bit to the Battle of Jericho. Apparently, the last couple of lines we heard there about the blowing of the bugle is linked to the Battle of Jericho.
Yeah, they had to go around it 7 times blowing bugles and then the walls fell down.
There you go. So I give to you this week Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Jefferson Jericho Blues.
I love the sound of it, by the way, and a little bit of history in there. Brilliant stuff. Have you sent it to Mr. Ed Long, the head of history at Ripon Grammar School?
I have not, but I shall.
Very good. Excellent. And of course, if you didn't hear that, you'll just see us bobbing along in the background. Do go and listen to it, then it will chime up with obviously our bobbing along there.
Well, you say that, but what I do love is how utterly tone deaf the four of us look. Because of the delays on Zoom, we're all bobbing along to a completely different rhythm.
Very true, very true.
Before we end this one, I am hoping that this week we will be accepted into all countries with our podcast.
Yeah, me too as well. There was I won't name the countries that we weren't accepted in because worry for our lives, but yeah, hopefully we'll be accepted into, and a plea to YouTube and to those countries out there as well. Just
please accept us.
Please accept.
Please accept us.
Thank you for joining us once again. Absolute pleasure, and we'll see you again next week. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.